not gonna let us go, are they?
What do you do?
You know, you can't control what happens to you in this world. It just doesn't work that way. But there's another equally, if not more important thing you can control. Your perception of what happens to you. What do I mean? Well, I'll tell you a story. When I was in my mid-20s, I got very, very sick due to some medical malpractice. I won't go into what happened because it's complicated and frankly, it's besides the point. The point is I was very ill and I was in excruciating pain every day, both physically and mentally. There was nobody to help. The doctor who did this to me had me convinced that she had done nothing wrong and that my illness was psychosomatic. I'd later find out it definitely was real, but not for many years. And because of my insurance, I didn't have access to any other doctors. My friends and loved ones had checked out a long time ago because I was a bad person. A liar, a thief, a junkie, and just a narcissist in general. My life was all about the next buzz and who do I need to fuck over to get it. So when I found myself in dire straits, there was not a soul to help. Nobody cared. Nobody wanted to hear about it. They just thought it was another scheme to get some drugs. I always had a drinking problem, that was for sure. But during this period, I became a crippling alcoholic. I developed an addiction to oxycodone to try and numb the pain. I could barely function at my job, but I couldn't quit because I needed the money. I kept fucking up constantly, and my boss was already abusive to all his employees. The fact that I was making so many mistakes all of a sudden made me his favorite target, and I couldn't say anything or he'd fire me. So that was my life. Wake up, hurt, drink and take pills till I was just fucked up enough to mitigate the pain, but hopefully still able to function. Go to work, get screamed at for 8 hours while I tried to conceal my pill addiction, come home, drink alone till I fell asleep. If I could sleep. Most of the time I couldn't. After about a month of this, for the first time in my life, I considered suicide. And I don't mean I'm a depressed teenager, wake me up inside. No, this was like a very adult thought. It was like, if I weigh the pros and cons here, death is objectively the best choice in this situation. It just might be worth it. But I didn't do it. You know when you're running and exhaustion starts to set in and you're like, I can't go another step. But then you're like, what if I can though? You want to test yourself. So you take one more step and then you take one more and another and another. And before you know it, you've gone another mile, maybe 2. How far can you actually go? That was the little game I played with myself. Every day, it was the same conversation inside my head. Sure, I said, I'm gonna do it, but not today. You can take it for one more day. I know you can. And I began to take a certain kind of pride in this. It was like a test to see how much I could endure. What does unbearable really mean? And so one more day turns into a week, into a month, and into a year. After a couple years, I started to get better. Each day started to feel easier than the last, and eventually I finally got medical help and I was able to mostly recover. I lost 4 years of my life to this thing, and it was my late 20s, which is a crucial period because that's when you're supposed to stop dicking around and actually start building a life. There was permanent damage to my mind and my body. I had no career, no love, my relationship with my family was in shambles. I was fucking angry, and I could have easily let that anger consume me, but there was actually an interesting thing that had happened during that time, and it saved me from that bitterness. I had stopped lying to people. I had stopped stealing. I had started thinking about how other people felt, which was not something I could ever say about my previous self. When you're in a lot of pain, for a long time, it forces you to think. When you're on the verge of taking your own life for a long time, it forces you to examine exactly what that life is and who you are. I was not a moral person, and realizing this forced me to change and actually adopt some principles and responsibility. And that's why I'm not bitter about it. I mean, I'm angry. It sucked just about as bad as anything can suck that doesn't kill you. But I'm not consumed by rage over it because in my eyes, It was necessary. I was such a piece of shit. Nobody had ever been able to get through to me or change me. The only thing that could cure me of my selfishness was a monumental struggle. And that leads into the point of this video. I see my life as a story, and in the arc of my existence, that was the journey into the underworld. The harrowing descent into the depths, which humbles the protagonist and teaches him to let go of his hubris. Without that journey, I'd still be a piece of shit. I'd still be a person I truly hated. When I think of it in those terms, it's no longer just a horrible thing that happened. It takes on great meaning. Like I said, you can't control what happens to you in this existence, but you can control your perception of it. You can control how it fits into the narrative of your life. If you choose to view suffering as unfair, if you see it as the world or God or fate slighting you, then you cause yourself even greater suffering. However, if you choose to view it as a task to be taken on and a test of your will, you can find a strange but very real fulfillment in it. When that dark hour arrives, recognize that it may be that great trial of your story in which you truly find yourself. So why am I talking about this? Well, it's because of a comment I got the other day. You know who you are. I told you I'd make you a video. I'm not going to show the comment or read it directly because I don't want to do that to you. I just want to say this to you, and I'm doing this as a video because I think everyone should hear it. Don't tell yourself the wrong story. The one you're telling yourself is a tragedy, and that's not what you want, man. Don't make your story like that. It's a shitty genre. Now, I know hearing me say this, one might think, hey, life is tragic. You can't just magic it away by thinking about it differently. And to that, I would say this. You kind of can. And I've got a great example. It's a fictional example, but it illustrates my point perfectly. There's a movie I love. I've probably watched it 50 times at least. It's called The Grey. You should just go watch it, but if you don't feel like doing that, I'll give you the gist of it here just so you understand my point when I make it. This is The Grey. Liam Neeson's character, John Otway, is the protagonist of the film. He's a marksman who kills wolves for an oil company in Alaska, and he is suicidally depressed over the death of his wife. In the film's first act, he finds himself stranded in the Alaskan wilderness with a handful of other men after surviving a plane crash. They have no idea as to their location, they have no method of communicating with anyone, and they have no weapons other than pocket knives. The driving force in the movie is that they're being pursued by a pack of wolves. A lot of people got mad at this movie because apparently wolves are afraid of people and they don't usually behave this way, but that's missing the point. The point is that these men are in a desperate situation and death stalks them from all sides. One man succumbs to the injuries he sustained in the crash. Another goes to sleep and never wakes up, dying of hypothermia. The wolves are picking them off one by one. One of them simply succumbs to despair. He just loses the will to continue, sits down, and lets the wolves come and claim him. When the last man dies, drowning in a river with his face just inches from the surface, Otway is left alone and hopeless. And then what happens next, to me, is one of the most fascinating scenes I've ever witnessed in a movie. And it took me a long time to figure out what it meant and why it affected me so much. Otway falls to his knees, losing the will to continue. He looks through all the photos in his friends' wallets, which he's been collecting to bring back to their families in the case he manages to survive. Suddenly, he realizes that he's wandered right into the middle of the wolves' den. Inadvertently, he's ended up in the worst possible place and is now surrounded by the pack. The alpha wolf slowly stalks towards him, and at this point, he looks at a photo of his wife and a letter he wrote to her. He looks at all these memories laid out in front of him, both his and others, and makes a decision. He arms himself with all he has: a knife, and some broken glass. Reciting a poem written by his father long ago, Otway stands and prepares to face the wolf. And the movie ends. The first time I saw this movie, I thought two things. How the fuck does this guy think he can kill a wolf, let alone a pack of wolves? And also, why don't we get to see it? That's the most important part of the movie. Because I'm an idiot. That's not the most important part of the movie. There's a great video about this on a channel called Like Stories of Old, which really helped me understand this movie, and I'd highly recommend watching it. It points out that what Otway is doing is searching for meaning, not survival. It's almost obvious once you understand it. Of course he can't kill a whole pack of wolves with his bare hands. That's not the point. The point is he's facing certain death, and yet he decides to face it with courage rather than fear. This made so much sense to me because it's an excellent example of what I've been talking about. The stories we tell ourselves about our lives. Whether he remains on his knees or stands and fights, Otway is dead. But by standing and fighting, it changes his story. His wife told him not to be afraid, so he honors her by being courageous. He pays tribute to his father and even his own younger self by reciting this poem. And as for his friends, well, this wolf killed them, and he's gonna honor them by doing his best to fuck it up. All of these plot elements of his life are drawing together into a conclusion and revealing their final meaning. The meaning he decides on right here and now. His death would probably be much less painful if he just took his own life or let the wolves have him. But as a tribute to his loved ones, Otway decides to die with a last good fight. By choosing to suffer greatly in their honor, he changes the story of his death from tragic to heroic. His family and friends are all dead, but in his own personal, internal way, he is fighting for them. And that's all a hero is. Someone who puts others before himself. Even though his situation is utterly hopeless, Otway finds a way to frame it narratively into something of great importance. It's not just the end of his story, it's the climax, because that's what he makes it in his own mind, and because of that, his death becomes something more than just meaningless pain. Anyway, you can't decide what happens to you, but you can decide what it means, and that's everything, really. That's all your life is. It's the story of you, told by you, and how you tell it to yourself is very important because it can be the difference between utter despair and great purpose. And this is not some intangible philosophical bullshit I'm talking about. It directly and powerfully affects your psychological well-being. So make sure you tell it right. Don't start writing some crazy shit. Don't start writing a tragedy. No matter how tragic the plot elements you're dealt may be, that doesn't have to define the story. It doesn't necessarily mean you get out alive or unscathed. Some shit you can't beat. It just means that you engage it with the same passion you would engage your best moments. Write the dark chapter with the same conviction you'd write the happiest one, because it's all part of the same story. Thanks for watching. Remember, tell yourself the right story. Get out there in the world and go fuck yourself.